A warm welcome and good morning to everyone. It is 10:06 and I am officially opening up the session. For those who just joined, please indicate using the chat box where you are joining us from. I am very excited to have you, and I promise this is going to be a different type of webinar. Those who have been going to a lot of webinars would know that sometimes they can really be boring, and I will try with my help of colleagues, of course, to make it more exciting. And most importantly, to make sure that you take some value out of it, and see you in the second and the third. So this is the first colloquium on Foundation of Infrastructure Asset Management. We've planned a number of this series where we are going to be unpacking what it is that we mean when we say foundations of infrastructure asset management. So for today's colloquium, we're only just going to focus on the differences between technical and financial asset register. You will find that we are more biased towards the public sector because that's where we tend to find duplicates or different asset registers. But when you look at the intended value, it's actually more or less the same. So we will be focusing on that. But for those in the facilities management, I'm sure you'll still find this valuable as well. My name is Julia Mamagogo, and I'm the head of sales in Pragma. And I will be facilitating this session for today. I'm not alone. I'm joined by my colleagues, Dr. Emmanuel Ngobo, as well as Andre Jordan. And before we kick off with the discussion, I just want everyone to find their way around the platform, being Zoom. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I would like you to just type your answers into the chat box, just to make sure that everyone actually knows where to ask if they want to ask a question. And we will be taking the questions throughout the session, by the way. So the first question, there's a prize for the first, a person who responds. So Daisy, please monitor. Whoever responds first to these questions will be getting a prize, which I will reveal as soon as I figure out what that prize is. The first question is, what does GRAP stand for? GRAP. Andre and Emmanuel are not allowed to answer. And Pragma colleagues also. So let's get started. Do you have an answer? No, not you, Andre. What does GRAP stand for? Joke in Afrikaans. Hey, come on. So even your Google skills are very slow too. I mean, the searching skills. Okay, let's move on. Again, confirm we don't have an answer now. Can I move on?
We have an answer from Sianti. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. Who said generally recognized accounting practice.
All right, great. That is correct. And the next question is, what does GAMAP stand for? GAMAP. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's move on. ISO 55000 is a standard for what? You're supposed to type the answer, Nicholas, not raise.
Yaku was first with that one, saying asset management.
Awesome, it is. Oh, I forgot to mention, Lisa is not allowed to answer also. Which department is responsible for asset register administration in your organization? Is it finance, engineering, or both? There's no right or wrong answer for this one. We just want to know, how do you manage asset registers? And the last question is, what does EAMS stand for? EAMS. Very close. Yeah.
No, I'm going to give that one to Tiru because he spelled it correctly.
All right, you are in charge there, Daisy, and I'm happy.
Enterprise asset management.
All right, that's great. So everyone knows.
But good to note that on the question about which department is responsible, quite a few people said both. So that's a positive answer.
Yes, indeed. Okay, great. So everyone knows their way around the chat box. And if you have a question, there's also another, let's call it a button, where you can actually post the question in there. But basically, we'll be monitoring both the chat box and the Q&A. You're more than welcome to post the questions as we go through the discussion. And if you prefer to contribute with your voice as well, you're more than welcome to just let us know so we can give you the time to speak. Right, now getting into the introductions of our subject matter expert. Our first one is Dr. Emmanuel Ngobo. He is the chairperson for Center for Municipal Asset Management. He's also an author of the Road to CFO book, which I'm showing the details there. So if you are interested in buying the book, which I would encourage that you do that, because it is really a good read from the brief that I saw. You can get in touch with him via the details there, and he will also be happy to actually engage with you even after the session. He will also just send the details, his email address, as well as a contact number in the chat box. So many of you can also pick up from there. Emmanuel comes from the financial asset management. So as we saw from the answers as well, that actually the responsibility of an asset register administration is both the engineering as well as the financial. So because of that, we decided to balance the views as well. So Emmanuel will be filling in the financial asset management aspect. And then Andrew Jordan, who is our partner consultant and in Pragma, and he will be filling the engineering asset management part. Now, back to the topic, which is foundation of infrastructure asset management. Whenever I read the topic, what comes to mind for me, it's a roadmap like this, which is a roadmap that Pragma has developed. The roadmap is linked to ISO 55000. And what you see basically on the roadmap is 3 layers. And if I can just move this here, can you still follow me? You see my cursor? And not from my panelist there, Emmanuel? All right, great. Now, what you see on the roadmap, there are 3 layers, and basically you've got the basic layer, which is now the foundation mostly. And once you start filling up the gaps, there is also a second layer, which is where you start looking at improvement initiatives and optimizing your practices. And the last layer is where now you want to sustain. So for the purpose of this discussion, we will just be focusing on this layer. And why is that? For 2 reasons. The first reason is infrastructure is the backbone of our economy in South Africa. So we have to really make sure that we get the basics right before we can even start at improving and optimizing. And in my opinion, we are still far from actually getting even the basics right. You see that from when we get the tenders out there, there is a lot of confusion as to what should an asset register look like. And also in terms of the compliance, there's also sometimes a bit of confusion there, and Emmanuel is here to clarify that. So that is why it's important for us. And in the following webinars, which is 2 and 3, we will then start looking at the other areas, which is your optimization and the sustainability part. Now, Andre, I don't see your video. I miss you. If you can put it up, because I would like you to just explain to us on what we mean by foundations in the public sector space. When you talk about foundations of infrastructure asset management, what do we really mean and what makes up that foundation?
Sure, thanks, Julia. I'm surprised you can't see my video. I can. I trust and hope the other members can see the video as well. Now, the nice thing is we've actually got the foundations there at the bottom part of the road. So everything that heads up towards, diagnose, strategize, comply, stabilize, all the way there until you take the bend. I'd almost like to say, before you take the bend, all of those we see as the foundations. Now, when you think of foundations, you want to start with, and that's normally the financial view, you want to know what assets do you own, where are they, and what are their current performance? And I like that Pragma has pushed this a little bit forward. You can see the fourth one from the left is performance measurement with quick wins. I kind of like that. What it's saying is let's put performance first to understand the assets. And we don't always see that in the public space, but we'll get to that in just a second. So first of all, there must be an asset register. What assets do you own? You want to know where are they? What are the sort of nameplates? What do you have to look after? When you look after these assets, you're doing so in two parts in the public space. You're doing so preventatively, so you need to do certain inspections, which might be regulatory or just common sense and smart. And alternatively, also you want to know when there's a breakdown so that you can fix it. And both of these you want to enable. You'll enable that through what we call a work planning and control process. But even these processes, you know, that one over there, this process is very much dependent on, do you have an asset register? Do you have asset care plans or maintenance plans logged against it so that it can spew out work orders and you can react to it? Now, in the public space, we've got this wonderful opportunity that we've got so many people out there that's using our assets on a daily basis. Can you imagine if they had a little app? They can say, listen, I just saw a pothole over here. I take a picture. GIS is enabled. I send it somewhere. And we get all, you know, we've got this thousands of people enabling us to pick up where, you know, where there's shortcomings and we can go fix them. So that's the second part. So preventatively, this is the reactive part. And we've got all these people that helps us doing inspections. And the nice thing is they practically don't even have to, you know, scan a barcode. As long as they've got GIS enabled, we sort of know which road they're referring to, which street light they're referring to, which box is been opened and the lock has been broken, etc. Now, with that, you need a lot of supporting services. And you can see that at the bottom. You can see contractor and contract management. You need to have that enabled because in the public space, we use a lot of contractors. And then lastly, you need spares. So that need to be enabled as well. The nice thing I'd like to end off with, Julia, is there's a subtle difference which asset management in its purest form is now putting forward a lot stronger. And that is that it's not about the assets, it's about the performance, it's about supporting the organization's goals. And that's why I like what Pragma did here with the fourth one, is to look at performance measurement. You want to understand what services you're supposed to deliver and how well you're currently delivering it before necessarily looking at the assets. Do you have the right assets? Are they performing as you've expected it? And I think that's a part where we can move a little bit more towards yes, it is about the assets. You've got the assets. You need to maintain the assets, but continuously asking yourself, how well are these assets performing? And that will direct you into making certain decisions regarding them.
Totally agree with you there, Andre. And I will, of course, agree with you because you are my colleague, and you know this is our service offering to the public sector. But I just want to invite Emmanuel just to get his opinion on these foundations of infrastructure in the public environment. What do they mean? Or is it even Pragma on the mark, or we totally off the mark?
No, you're quite there. Not exactly off the mark. Firstly, let me greet everyone. You just put on the spot there. And also thank you for the marketing of the book. I truly appreciate. My wife handles the book account. So the more sales one gets, the more happier she is. So happy wife, happy life. So thank you so much, Julie, for that. On the question that you just posed, certainly you are on the right track. But obviously we have to take cognizance of the fact, in terms of technology and where we are right now, as much as we want all these nice things so that we can be able to move forward more quickly and we can accelerate our progress. But we must just be mindful of, especially municipalities, in terms of maturity, in terms of the IT aspect and so forth. So we just need to progressively move in the right speed, but definitely those are the things that we need. But as I said, just having that understanding, in terms of where, the organizations or the municipalities are in terms of some of that. So yeah, I would say I do echo what Andrew just spoken about, but obviously with that particular caution as we progress. Thank you.
Yeah, great. And just back on the technology part, we've seen the president making announcement on IoT being, a strategic focus for the country. How much longer are we going to wait for us to actually start benefiting from these technologies that are out there? I mean, yes, we know the slow pace in municipalities, particularly, government sphere in general, but we've ran out of time, and now we really need to start putting plans in place so that we can start benefiting from those. So from your experience and your observations, how far off are we from leveraging on those technologies?
Again, we have to take an honest view. Some things are nice to have. I hope there are no politicians here. I can speak my mind. Because some of the things that are said are politically good, for our citizens. But when you take an honest view, I think also COVID did expose us in terms of the challenges that we are still experiencing, in quite a number of communities. Like right now we're having this webinar. Some municipalities or other communities do not have even good network to actually receive some of these transmissions. Now, you can talk of these, IoTs and a lot of systems and softwares and so forth. But if you still don't have the basics, such as a good network infrastructure to those particular communities, so you are still going in line with, let those who have the haves have more, and then those who are still disadvantaged not be able to actually partake into those new things that are coming out. So we are still a long way to some of the things, because there are certain fundamentals that we still need to first deal with, and then we can be able to actually, up our game. So as said, it's good to have these good things that other countries are doing. We appreciate them, but we also take cognizance of where we are and the struggles that are truly out there. I visit some of the rural municipalities, and you see, where they are, and you just say, in 2021, we're still experiencing such. But unfortunately, that's a reality in other areas that perhaps some of us have not been exposed to. But when you see those things, you just say, we still need to go back as much as possible to some of those basics or fundamentals and deal with those things that are still there. I hope I've answered on that.
Yes, and speaking of fundamentals, one of those in infrastructure asset management is asset register. Just elaborate how critical this asset register is. And I would like Andre to also add in there on infrastructure maintenance plans. We know it links into the asset register as well. We know it's all well good to have asset register, but if you don't have a plan on how to maintain those assets you've listed in there, we don't have a strategy there pretty much. So just back to the fundamentals, the basics, asset register administration. How critical is it?
Yeah, so it's extremely critical, if I may take the answer, the question, Julie, and I want to come back to Emmanuel's response to the foundations, and I understand that there are different levels of maturity in municipalities. We see that continuously, and that should be concerning to us all. Now, the dilemma with that is, if you can you imagine you've got a car, right? And you've got a kid, and at some point in time you're going to take your car and say, listen, I'm going to buy myself another new secondhand. It's irrelevant. You're going to give this car to your kid, and he uses this car and he never services it. He doesn't look where he's driving, and he's not looking after this asset. Which means your anticipation is you're going to give this car to your kid, and he's going to be able to use this car for the next X amount of years. But he doesn't get that out of the car because he doesn't look after it. And you look after that car and what your son or daughter has been using, and you're thinking, what a waste. You're not looking after this. I'm not getting the value out of this asset. And that's the dilemma if you do not have this foundation layer. Because you're building something that's not built to be run to failure. Put it in there, wait for it to fail, and then you rebuild the whole thing. Infrastructure doesn't work like that. And if you think it works like that, then you're never going to get not even half the service or the value out of it. So if you do not have this foundation layer to some degree, you're wasting your money. We're wasting our money. And that's the concerning part. Yes, at the top layer, we are wasting money through people helping themselves, through the back door, sure. But this is equally bad, where we're spending the money and not getting the value, because we do not have this foundation in there, because we cannot look after it, we cannot service it and get the value from it. And that influences everybody, no matter in which small municipality they are. That's the concern. So having a basic asset register in place, which is fairly up to date, understanding what value you're getting from each of those assets, and being able to service them through maintenance plans, and through reactively fixing them is critically important. There's great pieces of research study done that if you, for instance, don't look after a road, right, and you resurface it, or you take the top layer off and you resurface the top layer, then for every year you postpone upgrading that road, it costs you multiple more. And that's what we're seeing. Because municipalities are not in control, it actually is costing us a lot more than it should have. So even though I say that I am an engineer, I love finance, and I know Julia's going to smile, she knows that. We have to bring engineering and finance here together and say, folks, if we want to do engineering, let's be smart about it. We cannot put assets out there and not look after them. It is totally irresponsible. Wasteful expenditure, I believe they call that in the municipal space.
Yeah. Emmanuel, do you agree with the alignment between financial and engineering teams to work together in getting the basics right, and basic being asset register in this instance?
Yeah, that's one thing that I definitely agree with. But we also have to, be aware or be mindful of where exactly we are in terms of asset management within the public sector, especially, and what actually put us where we are. In terms of the public sector, taking an example, the municipalities, most of the asset management units, apart from a few municipalities, I heard that there's somebody from eThekwini here, they do have an asset management division within their engineering departments. But most municipalities, asset management is housed within the finance department. So it's more just about ensuring we have a good asset register from a financial perspective that can ensure that we are compliant. And that is the unfortunate part where we are right now. There's still some engagement as to how can we address that, because over the years, that is the lens that we've been looking at asset management, more to ensure that we are complying in terms of it. Maybe just to perhaps help other non-finance participants to understand exactly how we come up with the asset register. From a financial perspective, we look at the definition of an asset. Everything that goes into that asset register and any works thereafter is informed by that particular asset. The definition of it is just to educate some of you. It's defined as a resource controlled by the organization as a result of past events which can be measured reliably, which future economic benefit or service potential when you deal with government are expected to flow into the entity. So now anything that is done within the finance space from an accounting perspective or finance perspective originate from that particular definition. So when we have the GRAP standards that you referred to earlier and so forth, but they all find expression from there. So the compliance and the MFMAs and everything else is derived from that. So unfortunately, as said, most municipalities then not practice a true asset management, but they merely just ensure satisfaction of this particular definition of an asset, make sure that we are compliant to all these things. As an example, from that definition, it says that particular asset must be controlled by the municipality. So you must have that tangible asset or intangibles such as your IT softwares. So it's merely just about the recording part. We've got it in our asset register. We've got the value because of past events. There was a payment was made for this particular asset, and there is a service potential because we are going to render these services of 1, 2, 3 to the communities. So from an asset management perspective, we tick all the boxes to say, yes, we've complied with that, but then what about the management thereof from a life cycle perspective that Andrew was talking about? So unfortunately, as said, those are certain flaws within the system that still needs to be addressed going forward. There are most municipalities, such as our metros, that are now starting to get that right, but definitely there's a long way to go, but something has been started. Thank you, Julie.
Yeah, Julia, if I can maybe add to that, and I think that's an important point which Emmanuel highlights, is that the financial environment has been very well audited over the last number of years. It's a well audited environment because you've got these audits, and guys are non-compliant and red flagged and whatever. We're very strong on auditing, and auditing has realized that this asset management is something that we need towards providing good service, and therefore finance has started this drive towards asset management. One of the challenges, as Emmanuel said, is where does asset management, where should it be hosted? Who takes responsibility of this scope of putting all of this in place? And finance only knows finance, so therefore the first thing they're going to do is put it inside finance. In some municipalities, I've seen that they put it in procurement because finance and procurement is very close to each other, and often procurement sits in finance as well. And so you keep it close to you where you can audit it and keep control over it so that you just don't get a finding, because boy, you're so afraid of a finding. You might provide poor service, but you just don't want to get a finding. That's the punchline. But the fact of the matter is, this is an engineering function. And if you don't give it over to engineering, and that's the finance or the auditing guys' challenge here. You have to release it into engineering and make them strong and support them so that they can do what they're supposed to do. As long as this remain in the finance space, it's just not going to be where it really should be. Emmanuel, I don't know whether you
I wonder if you agree too. Are you ready to hand over the asset register to the engineering team to actually
the engineering asset register?
Engineering asset register, yes. Speaking of the engineering and financial asset register, Andre, from an engineering perspective, what are you really interested in when you are asking for an asset register from our clients? What do you want to see in that register? What level of detail are you interested in? And Emmanuel, I'd like you to also think about, from a financial perspective, what level of detail should it be at, and how does that help you?
So it's interesting, if you read ISO 55010, they blatantly say that finance and asset management defines assets differently, and it's material, this difference, which is kind of interesting. And the moment you read that, you also realize that, hang on, because we have different responsibilities towards the same asset, we're going to view it differently, we're going to log it differently, we're going to maintain it differently. Finance has the responsibility to account for it. Engineering has the responsibility to look after it and to deploy it towards the service as which it's intended. And therefore, when engineering looks at this asset, he needs to know, what is it? What specification? If I'm going to sit in Otjiwarongo and I'm going to send a guy 300 kilometers down the line to go look after a generator or a transformer, what spare is he supposed to take with him? Because if he takes the wrong one, he has to take 300 kilometers back to come and collect the right one again. So you want to know exactly what that component is out there, what the spares looks like for that specific component. You want to know where it is. Right? Where's this transformer? If I'm going to send someone there. So linked to, therefore, GIS. I always say in the asset management space, there's 3 asset registers. There is the financial asset register, there is the equipment or the engineering asset register, and there's the GIS register, because there their view on the asset is slightly different as well. Finance want to say how much it costs, that piece of earth. Engineering wants to say, well, what services do you need me to bring there? And GIS wants to say exactly what's the parameters of this earth, what's that pinpoint, etc. So 3 different asset registers and the need to link in that space. And then, of course, in the asset register, you need to know, how do you look after it? What kind of preventative maintenance, what inspections do you need to run against it? Then also if you want to look at performance, you also want to know how much did it cost me originally. It's how much did it cost you if I'm going to sell it, how much did I sell it, so that I can do some focused improvement on it and see whether I'm getting the value of my assets. And ideally, you also want to know, when you bought it, when did you anticipate to replace it? Because you want a budget for it. And you want an anticipation of whether you're getting value from it. This is not necessarily the same as depreciation, but it should be aligned. So ideally, you want to bring depreciation along with this original view from this is how long it's going to be.
Thanks, Andrew. Let's hear what Emmanuel has to say about what he's interested in when he posts that asset register. What do you look at? I suspect it's not going to be as lengthy as Andrew already. You just want to see a line item and the cost and what else?
Correct. Yeah, I think for us, as said, because of compliance, we actually have like guidelines as to what exactly should be within the asset register. And taking it even a step back, within your policy, in any organization, that's what the AG comes and first audits to then make sure whatever that you have done is according to that policy. So within your policy, there will be those aspects as to what exactly ought to be within your register. So other things, perhaps from a financial perspective, will be your classification in terms of what type of asset is this. Is it an infrastructure asset? If it is an infrastructure asset, is it a water and sanitation, or is it electricity, or it could even be your motor vehicles or buildings? So there are different classifications. As some of you might be aware of the M-score part that also enables the standardization of how we then classify these particular types of assets from an asset management perspective. And then from there, you have what exactly is this particular asset, going into the GRAP 17 requirements, which talks of the components for each infrastructure asset as an example, whereby you can have one facility that you break down into different components within that particular facility, and including even deeper to even look at, as an example, a pump station. You have a small pump building, you have your pump, you can have your motors. So all of that is then componentized. Other things could be your useful life, because each asset may have a different useful life in terms of the lifespan. It could be, another thing is exactly where it is. Andrew touched on it from a GIS perspective, because you also need to have that part. And then importantly, the figures. How much does this particular asset cost? The accumulated depreciation that we have, the impairments that we must have on a yearly basis, because each and every asset deteriorate over and above impairment. Could be maybe damages and so forth. When you do your conditional assessments, then you may have to have the impairments values in there. And then the last part will then be your book value in that particular financial reporting period. So those are the critical aspects that we look for within the asset register. So from what Andrew was talking about, for us, we are not really interested on the size of the pipe and all of that, but definitely that's what we want to see there, which we always encourage municipalities, because it helps to have one source information or document, so to say, when the AG comes to actually audit, because you don't want to have an asset register from a financial perspective and an engineering asset register from the engineering side, So at the end of the day, we can be able to pull all this information together, and then it will be easier for all of us as we actually move forward as organizations. So on our end, definitely we are encouraging that going forward, that we must have one common source of information that organization is, because we can't be working, having two different sources of information, but for one thing. So, but as said, those are the key aspects that we look for on our end. Thank you.
So,
Thank you,
sorry, I
Emmanuel.
have to get here. This is such an interesting point, Emmanuel. And once again, you're coming from a financial perspective and saying, I want one source of information. And that's the basics of information. You want one source. You cannot afford to have multiple. And therefore, when I started in this space, the challenge was always, folks, why do we have multiple asset registers? It does not make sense. You need one. That's the most basic rule of information management. And then you get into very mature environments, and they have three. And you scratch your head and you think, that doesn't make sense. These guys have matured. They're the most mature, and they have multiple. How could that be? What justification could you have for it?
Matured but complicated.
Yes. Why would you do that? It's not smart, is it? But when you dig deeper, you realize there's a good reason for it. Because what these different parties need to do with the asset and how they need to maintain it is differently. And as long as finance therefore think that their asset should be the only one, they will never cater for the engineering perspective and what their requirements are with regard to the asset. And that's what we find frequently, is that we'll get to an environment and they don't have an equipment or an engineering assets register. And when you have an engineering asset register, that register enables you to do certain things because it's got certain values in there. You know when you last inspected it, when you last serviced it. You know how many kilometers you've done last since using it, and therefore you know which maintenance is coming up next. The financial register is not built for that. It doesn't have those fields. If you were to include it in there, it would make it romslop. It would make it heavy. It would make it nonsensical for the financial guy to use. And that's the reason why you end up with multiple, therefore also GIS. Can you imagine if you wanted to build an asset register that has all the specific GIS requirements, exactly where the road goes? That's of no relevance to the finance guy, exactly where it goes to the millimeter or meter. It doesn't make sense for the maintenance guy either. It does make sense for the GIS guy because he needs to know what property to sell and buy. So if you try and cater, and that's what we find, if we cater for all of these requirements in one, you don't properly cater for either of the three, or only for one. And that's therefore my call, is that the financial environment needs to realize that they need to be an asset register right next to theirs, GIS. There needs to be one right next to theirs, this engineering, that caters for their requirement. And if we don't build that environment to make them strong, we're never truly going to be successful. You look at your asset register and your biggest requirement is, what is the current worth? Because you need to account for that. The engineering guy is looking at it and saying, is it performing the way it should? What is its condition? And can the guys use it? What is its availability? How many potholes is being generated? How many broken pipes per period of time? And how many water are we losing because of it? How much downtime we have on our electricity network, and therefore not availability? This is the engineering and the services quest. And therefore, if we do not make engineering strong, which is closest to operations, I always say, operations is key because they provide service. The rest of us, we service them. Finance, service operations; maintenance, service operations; procurement, service operations. Because operations, services are clients. And and that I believe should be our view.
I would also like to...
Sorry, man, I just see quite a few comments coming through from Daryl Aberdeen, who's another one of our partner consultants. I'm wondering if maybe we can give him an opportunity to just add a couple of comments there to the conversation.
Yeah.
Daryl? Is he being unmuted?
Camera shy, Daryl, go for it.
Trust me, Daryl is not camera shy when you see his setup at home.
Right. All right,
And
well
then we
done.
also had some while we're waiting for Daryl to unmute, we also had some interesting comments. Matthew Maguire also mentioned something regarding energy audits, and I think, something that's probably more so relevant now, considering all the load shedding that we're going through and the impacts that those, that has on our electrical infrastructure. So yes, Matthew, do you want to maybe also mention something to the audience, or you're just happy with your comment? We can also unmute you if you would like.
Thank you so much. No, nothing much to add, but I just wanted to say, as much as this is a very hot topic, we are seeing a lot of people shying away from the activities. But I mean, we know for a fact that if you look at municipalities, for instance, there are so many challenges that they have to deal with at the moment. So we are talking of now the ever increasing population. So meaning even their systems are overloaded. Over and above this, if you talk of energy cost increase plus labor, this is also something that we need to deal with going forward. Plus unplanned maintenance over and above controlling water runoff from their systems. So it's really something that we need to look at, but it's more about, again, going out of our ways to share best practices to all these very important people. Because if we cannot be able it's now very important for us to look at how best to contribute to sustainability or climate change, so to say. This is where it has to start. Because I mean, if municipalities in the near future cannot be able to process all the waste, you can just imagine what's going to happen. It's going to be a disaster. It's not just about municipalities, but I'm just making an example.
Oh, sure, Matthew. And I think bringing it back to the asset register conversation as well, we're finding that a lot of the municipalities in South Africa, especially the, sort of the low maturity ones, are really struggling to document or capture their network assets, as part of their asset registers. And when I say network, I'm talking things like cables, and even if we look at water and sanitation infrastructure, things like the pipeline. And that's where the GIS element that Andre spoke about quite a bit in the beginning, plays a big role, because, you need to sort of almost have that interface linked up to your asset register so that all of those assets or those segments can be accounted for, whether they be cables or pipelines. Daryl, I think you're unmuted now. Please,
yeah,
you can go for it.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'd been put in the dog box and not being allowed to unmute. So thank you very much, whoever unmuted me. Absolutely support what Andre Jordaan's saying. I don't think it is possible to have one single asset register. The focus is different. What I have seen fairly successful is that at the level of, let's call them the asset, not the component, but at the level of the asset, and everyone's got a slightly different idea what constitutes an asset. At the level of an asset, there can be a link, normally a many-to-one link, meaning that there are fewer financial assets than there are engineering assets. So if you can have on your multiple engineering assets a link to the one, take for instance a building or something like that, that might be as one asset within the financial asset register. On the engineering asset register, there might be multiple parts of a building, rooms. So on each room, you would link back to one financial asset one, and that's a potential way of at least linking them, even if you can't have one asset register. I would like to, and I haven't seen it done, but I would like to think a GIS asset register, and Andre can comment on that, he works with more than I do, there could also be a one-to-one relationship between the GIS and the let's call it the CMMS or the EAMS in terms of assets. The attributes you capture in GIS are vastly more rich in a sense than on the CMMS. There's lots more detail as to where it goes and things like that. But I think the point Andre made, we probably are stuck with more than one asset register. I've called two other ones in there, which I've seen. The SCADA system often looks different to the engineering asset register, and that's sort of the operating asset register. And sometimes we have a WBS structure which is a remnant of the construction period. And I've seen that integrated quite nicely into the engineering asset register. But okay, thanks very much. Very interesting conversation, everybody. Thank you.
Cool. And then just
for
one
your
more comment.
contribution.
Awesome stuff. And then just one more comment coming through from Nokukanya Mkize, who's actually the GIS specialist or manager at Rhein-Kunyeni Municipality. Yeah, Nokukanya, can we maybe unmute you so I can give you the opportunity to, to speak your view there, because it's a very important one, I believe. You're unmuted now, Nokukanya.
Morning. Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
No, so I was saying you put a very good comment in the chat box regarding your view. And you obviously are a GIS practitioner within the municipal space. So just your comments on what's been said.
I strongly believe that GIS can be used in integrating all the systems as mentioned. However, there is a great challenge when it comes to maintenance of our softwares and also promoting GIS as a tool. I'll quote just one example. I joined the municipality, Rhein-Kunyeni, about a year ago. So what I have been trying to do is to get everyone to use the apps for collecting data, for visualization of projects and stuff. But the problem is always with limited resources and also a lack in understanding of GIS. Most people understand GIS as just a mapping software or a mapping tool, yet you can actually get a lot from it. So I think one of the key things that can be done is to try and promote the uses and also the advancements that comes with it. Thank you.
Thanks, Nokukanya, for that contribution. I hope our CFO is still listening. I'm missing him. His video has disappeared, but he's making notes to start a program around training in the public space on GIS. Now, we've already established that the financial asset register is driven from a compliance perspective. And I would just like for Dr. Emmanuel to just bring up a slide which shows the different guidelines and regulations that they actually have to comply with. And from there, just to give us an idea of how much work is there when it comes to the financial side, and where do we as engineering service providers actually link to those guidelines. And Andrea, you can start preparing your closing remarks because we're really out of time, but don't want to rush Emmanuel. Emmanuel, if you can just please put up that slide that you showed earlier about the regulations, maybe we would get an appreciation of why the asset register is always stuck or coming from a financial point of view, when we would like for engineering team to be the one that's actually driving it.
Okay, I'm not sure if you are now able to
I can.
use this one.
I can see.
You can.
Yes.
Okay, presentation mode. No, I thought on this one, what I wanted to just show up is some of the role players within the asset management space as it stands right now. These are some, because you can even now start to include the likes of DBSA, that I'm sure you Pragma as well. I do know that you do work with them on some projects. So they are also part and parcel of the role players. So when you look into this, you have your ASB that crafts the GRAP standards, drawing from the previous speaker who spoke of the components that engineers are mostly interested on. GRAP 17 was amended because of that, because there was an outcry to say finance is only just interested on an asset, which can be a facility, just one facility. But then we had to make sure that you componentize to a level of detail that will assist the engineers to do their work, whatever that it is. I don't know what they are doing because they didn't say doing anything. So now it was amended to make sure that municipalities, as they recognize assets on their registers, then it will have those levels of detail to an extent that when National Treasury issued some guidelines on components, it was formulated by engineers because it was to enable, and recognize what they require on their side. So that was one of the ways to try and circumvent what has been said, having that these different sources of information. So now, having said that, you have the ASB, Accounting Standard Board, you have the SIGFARO, which I also am the chair of, Chartered Institute of Government Finance, audit and risk officers that play a role in the asset management field. From a provincial perspective, you have your provincial SALGAs, and then you also have your national departments, National SALGA, National COGTA, National Treasury, then provincial treasuries, then you have MISA, then you have your professional bodies such as SAMA, provincial COGTAs, and so forth and so on. So now, all of these particular organizations or role players within an asset management space want to be doing something, want to support municipalities or organizations that are out there. But what then happens is that as they all come and converge into one municipality, imagine some municipalities with maybe 2 or 3 individuals in the asset management unit. Everyone is wanting to support, everyone is pulling from every direction. Now they become frustrated, don't even know exactly what now needs to be done. Even the basics that they ought to be doing, they end up not doing them because it just becomes too much. Because as said, you have a national department such as National Treasury who comes in with some circulars or even comes in with some support programs through GTAX. I'm sure you guys might be aware of that. And then you have provincial department or provincial treasury that also plays a support role. And then you've got your COGTA that also does similar, programs and support roles. So now all of that is coming all into one. Unfortunately, then that becomes cumbersome and, it just defeats the purpose. So, and then including now the actual compliance from an MFMA perspective and other GRAP standards that must be complied with. So the environment on its own, we have not made it conducive now for our practitioners out there to actually do what they ought to be doing. Not that they don't want to do it, but unfortunately then the environment does not allow, which is something that has to be looked at. And perhaps at some point, if time does allow, I can share on some of the initiatives that we are trying to look into to try and actually sort this out. But that is basically where we are right now in terms of the overly regulated from a regulatory perspective, but also from a department support and other organizations perspective, which is something that is unfortunately out there as we speak. So I hope I've touched on that. I won't go into all the other slides. I thought I'll just share that from my end, Julie.
We will certainly make time in the future webinars where you can unpack this. We would be interested to see what the plans are. And unfortunately, we've come to almost the end of the session, but in closing, we've covered the foundations of infrastructure asset management. We focused a lot on the asset register administration, which we all agree that it is important, but we also agree that it is impossible to combine the two. So we will always be in a situation where there's an engineering asset register as well as the financial asset register. I actually like Darrell's point about still trying to create a link so that at least when we talk about that FLOSAF PAM, Matthew, then we know that in the financial asset register, it's just the FLOSAF PAM with whatever detail they want to see, but the engineering team wants to see the other details as well. Yes, willow pumps now. I got it, Matthew. Now, Andre, how do we move forward from this? What are the key takeaways that you would like our audience to take away with, and perhaps even make it practical for them to start implementing some of these initiatives? And Emmanuel, from your side, I would like you to think of a couple of actions that our audience can actually go away with and start implementing, or at least advocating for.
Yeah, so I suppose I go first, Julia. I want to congratulate Emmanuel on that slide. I think it just brings the complexity and the overregulation that we currently have, the complexity that we have in the municipal space to the fore. But I need to once again, I think that came across really well. We have to challenge the financial environment And I understand their plea, especially GRAP, has been developed for 17 specifically, that when we're going to invest something, that we actually get the investment and it not get lost somewhere in the ether or spent on something else, rather than what we've actually agreed to it. And I fully understand that. But we must understand that that ain't ever going to give us better service necessarily. And therefore, we have to make operations, engineering better at what they do. And for that, the financial guys need to support the guys on the other side of the fence. And how can we do that? We have a challenge in South Africa that our engineering environment is just not strong enough. We've a lot of our expertise has left the country, and we've not been grown. We've not been able to grow our local expertise strong enough. But giving financial support is only going to take us that far. We need engineering support on the floor. I'm convinced, absolutely convinced, that we have to have multiple asset registers. But that's maybe a point I haven't brought across. It's never about the asset register. It's never. It's about the function or the process that you want to facilitate. Whether that be you want to maintain it, or you've got a breakdown and you want to fix it, or from a financial perspective, then you want to report on it. It's about the processes and what you want to get out of the processes. And then you ask yourself, how do you enable those processes? And when you have that view, you realize that you need multiple asset registers, because GIS has different, as she mentioned, the multiple processes actually that GIS can enable, which is all true. So it's about the processes and the functionality that it supports. And then the important point that Darryl also said, yes, obviously these registers need to be linked. They need to be designed upfront to say this is how the financial register, the equipment or engineering register, and the GIS register are going to link up. And we still have this. And maybe we should also think about the whole. What is an asset and asset management, and where does it truly should be hosted? We've got this. The asset currently, and we've got an asset management, right? Asset management is for many people a financial function, because you buy and sell shares. But you've got physical asset management so even the word asset management gets stuck between these two worlds, and even in the words, it's hard to untangle them, and that's why maybe we have to often use words like engineering to try and say where it should go. Yeah, thanks. I think that's from my side, Julia.
Thanks, Andre.
Right, from my end, I concur with Andre. Definitely, that's what I was also trying to come up to. And you can have these different sources of, what can I call it? I don't want to say source of information, because somehow all of these must converge and become one when you are one organization, because you don't want one thing sitting somewhere, another sitting somewhere, but not talking to each other. So understanding, from a financial perspective, you must have that, engineering must have that, but ultimately find a point of convergence that will be able to then draw from that particular source. For me, I believe it's all possible, because I do know that there are countries that are able to do it. And at some point, it might take us years to get there. But I believe that, where there's a will, there's a way. And to some of us, we just also, must inculcate the spirit of no one is important than the other. Not saying if finance is more important or engineering is more important. But the important part, especially in the public sector, are the communities that ought to be served. So at the end of the day, everything comes back to that we must service these communities in terms of what is required from that particular municipality, and whether, the engineering guys have to make sure they manage these assets, operations and maintenance wise and so forth, well and good. You are important, as well as equally from the financial perspective, that you must record this particular asset, ensure that you've got proper book values and so forth. Because when you are compliant on the financial perspective, that enables, as an example, the municipality to borrow some funds, and then we can be able to render more services through getting more assets on the municipality and so forth. So as said, we are all equally important within the value chain, and the most important people for me is the community that we then need to serve. And when we inculcate that spirit, on ourselves, then we'll ensure that we can work well together and have those smiles, because at most times between finance and engineering meetings that I have been to, there is always some not so good words shared, but I'm hoping in due time, we'll keep to the smiles and we'll all know why we do what we do and recognize each other, the way we should in terms of the works that we are all supposed to be doing. So with those words, those are my departing shot, and thank you so much to Pragma, as well as the participants from sharing some of their thoughts. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Emmanuel, and thank you, Andre. So that is where we will leave it for today. And thank you so much for the questions, for your contributions. It was really great interacting with all of you. And please look out for the next webinar, which is going to take place in 2 weeks' time. And with that session, we will be unpacking the policy. Now we've covered the asset register administration, but with that comes a maintenance plan and a policy and a strategy. So our panelists, our GAIN, will be unpacking it for us, just to help us understand what it is that we expected to deliver, or if we were to write up that policy, what should it entail, and etc. And I look forward to your contribution also in that seminar. So that's it from my side. It's been great, and take care. Please, we are still in the COVID-19 situation. Please look after yourselves and look after your loved ones as well. And till next time, keep warm. Bye, everyone.